Welcome to Curiosities of Teaching and Learning, a podcast hosted and produced by the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning, a changemaker in education since 1994.
So welcome to the fifth episode of CTL's Crushing the COVID Classroom podcast series. I am pleased to have with me the four of us who have interviewed the teachers. And for our fifth episode, we're going to take a slightly different tack to this. We're going to talk with each other about the patterns and the lessons that we're learning from the teachers who are working in the field. The purpose of this entire series to begin with was to think about how we could elevate teacher voices in this time of change and upheaval and give teachers the kind of support that they recognize, and that's from each other, and that idea of teacher leadership. A big component of what we believe at the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning is that all teachers are leaders, and when they are practicing their craft in their classroom with their students, they are doing some really incredible things. So we have been reaching out and identifying teachers who we think are doing really exceptional jobs of that in the classroom. And today we want to spend a little bit of time kind of debriefing. Where are we? What are we learning? And what are we finding out? And what would we recommend as a result of this? So who you have with us in the room is Dr. Ashley Perkins, Emily Wilson, and Jennifer Wright. And they have been doing the interviews along with, I've been doing some of the interviews as well, Rolando Daniel. And so I'm going to put this out to you all. What are some of the patterns and lessons that you all are identifying as important as we've been listening to these teachers?
I'll kick it off.
All right.
So this is something that's been weighing on me a lot as a parent. So it was really interesting to have a chance to listen to teachers at different grade levels. But all of our interviewees have spoken to how they are creating a safe space for their students at a distance or creating community, even though they can't be there side by side with their kids. They all have different approaches, but it is something that they are all cognizant of. In our interview with Aaron, about 20 minutes in, he really was articulating a process that they have in their school already called advisory. So he's a middle school teacher, and they have these small, like homerooms, but they call them advisories, and it's all staff gets involved. And so that allows them to have this really small number of kids that they are kind of, during the regular school year, they are the bookends of the day. They see them in the morning and in the afternoon. And it only shakes out to be about 11 kids. You know, when you've got the PE teacher having one group, and you've got the art teacher having a group, and the wellness teacher having a group. And he's been able to keep that up, those daily check-ins with that little family within the school. So I thought his tack was unique, and it really leaned on a structure they already had in school. But Jen and Ashley, I know that both of the folks that you brought in also kind of spoke to how they were creating a space for their students.
Yeah, so I know one of the things that Jonelle really talked about, being a second grade teacher and having younger students, means that she really has to, those students are going to rely on their parents, and their parents needing to be a big part of the picture with the distance learning. And so she talked a lot about just simplifying things, making it easy for parents to figure out, just simple things, even how to change their school Chromebook to their Wi-Fi and connect to the home Wi-Fi, and how to do that, because a lot of us are not familiar with Chromebooks. They're structured a bit differently. But even just having all of their programs and all the virtual platforms that they use, having all of those in one place, so that parents did not have to keep up with a million different usernames and passwords for their kids. I think they use something called Clever to keep all of that in one location. That really makes it simpler for the parents. And I know something else that they've been very mindful of is that They've got a couple of students in her second grade level that are twins or have siblings of the same age or are part of the same family. And so to keep that simple for the parents, they have asked for all, or they've created a Google Classroom for all of the second graders in their team. I think there's 6 second grade classrooms in her school. It's a fairly good sized school. So when they've got twins, but one sibling is in a different classroom than the other sibling, that really helps make it easier for the parents to manage all that instead of, having multiple different classrooms for their kids to navigate all that in balance. So I think that was a good point, and to be really mindful of the parents and what they're going through, because they're taking on a lot of extra things right now. A lot of parents are working from home, and so they're having to juggle their own job, and they're also being homeschool parents right now too. So makes it a little bit easier for them.
What about Donnie, Ashley?
Yeah, so kind of like what you were saying with Jonelle. So one of the things that Donnie was kind of charged with doing was building an online platform. That is that one site piece like you were talking about with Jonelle. And what he told me is that he wanted kids to be able to get what they needed in as few clicks as possible. So everything is right there. It's a hub for every grade, access to guidance counselors, access to those teachers who are teachers of the specials. And so it's just right there. It's really compiled nicely, packaged that way for them. One of the things he also said that it made my heart smile was the YouTube live streams that he does. And so he and his team will find these kind of experts in the field who will come on and do a live stream of Q&A. And so they've had, I think, like an astronaut, a physicist. And so the people that they pick are people that have kind of hooked the parents' interest as well. And so what he was noticing was it wasn't just the students who were sitting down to do this, to view these YouTube live streams, but they were sitting down with parents or family members in the home and kind of watching it together and engaging in conversation with each other and then in conversation with their peers through the threaded conversation. So just another way that speaks to building community and having safe places for kids to engage in that kind of dialogue.
Yeah, and I think Angela did a little bit of that same idea. So she's reached out to some of those authors who are, I was looking for the names. Erica Dunbar was one of the authors. She's also hooked up with a organization called Facing History Now and had her students go in and listen to George Takei speak to his experiences during the World War II imprisonment camps as part of that experience. Yeah, how do you engage those students? But I also appreciate that something that Donnie talked about was his breakout room and how he was just kind of challenging his kids. It started off as a little bit of a whim, but as the kids got more and more into it, what I appreciate about Donnie is that he's equally as nerdy as I think we are, and he got into it and has really kind of been going. And so building that collaboration, or just building that space where it's okay for them to be 5th grade students. It's okay for them to be middle school students or high school students. And I know that's something that Angela really has worked on. She's been doing trivia on Friday evenings, Zoom trivia with her U.S. history students. And she also talked about that idea of my check-in question is just a question that has nothing to do with history. It's just, what's your favorite ice cream today, right? So how do we translate that experience that we all get jazzed about when you're a teacher, is that going into the classroom and being with those kids, and you can do that so much in person. But how do you translate that? And I think that's one of the things that teachers are really struggling with. Sitting in front of your computer is not the same as interacting with 30, 15-year-olds. Some days it might be better, but a lot of times it's not the same and creates a different kind of stress. So I appreciate the fact that all of the teachers were going out of their way to really create those safe environments and let the kids know that they were appreciated, that they had somebody they could reach out to. But it wasn't just about, okay, get your U.S. history done or get your social studies done or get your English done. It's about we're people and let's enjoy that.
Yeah, they all seem to recognize that even though we're in a virtual space, that safe space for their students is just as important in that virtual space as it is in the real life classroom. And so it's nice to know that educators are able to balance both of those in this world.
And I know Janelle was also, because of her kids being second graders, she is much more tied to a certain extent with some packet work. Not everything can be done on the computer at that age level. And it was very insightful that our district, as well as our school leadership, as they're going out and getting the packets to the kids, they're getting extra meals. They're checking in with them to make sure they're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think everyone articulated missing their kids. And, kind of to your point, Roland, I'm sure they do really miss teaching like literary analysis. But in addition to that, I think they miss the connection. And so people are really, I think in the classroom, sometimes we can forget how strategic we are with that. We're very strategic with our standards and our assessment. But it's kind of like the beginning of the school year for us in lots of ways. And so we are making big investments right now in classroom culture and classroom community.
I know that Angela spoke to, in the real life classroom, she's able to really look into her kids' eyes and really tap into their emotional state and if everything's okay. And I know she recognizes that that's harder to do in the virtual space. So having some of those opportunities, like connecting with what 7 drawer for you, are identifying with today, something like that, gets to tap into how her kids are holding up in this. And so I appreciated that, no, this virtual experience is not the same as or as good as being in person with your kids, because she seems so connected and in tune to where they are, but that she's trying to make those adjustments in the virtual classroom.
While still kind of maintaining some of those routines. So one of the things that I heard her say, and I cried a little bit, I got choked up watching it, was when she talked about the little boy who, I'm crying again, who got his next certificate in Lexia, and how important she knew that would be to him to have that certificate. So she's printing it and she's mailing it to him.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a surprise for him to get his snail mail. But so
that was something Janelle
did. Yeah.
So Jen kind of already touched on this, I think, because Janelle is an early elementary educator. She is leaning so heavily on parents. I mean, everyone is, but most especially at the elementary age. But maybe do we kind of want to shift the conversation a bit to ways in which we see teachers engaging with parents? It's already come up a little bit in our conversation now, but there's a lot of strategy where that is concerned. And I'll let somebody else kick it off if you'd like to. Ashley?
I'll start. One of the things that I found so interesting, as Roland said, Donnie is a super geek nerd. And so he's running the numbers every day, and he's checking in to see how many people are visiting the site that he created for his school. And he said 700 to 800 clicks a day. So that's showing you how much traffic, how many people are visiting that space, right, to check in with their children's learning, because it is an elementary school, and so a lot of that's probably being driven by parents. Mm-hmm. Also, he talked about, I really liked this idea that every evening between 5 and 6:30, the team, so his teaching team, they collectively write an email and send that out to all the families, just highlighting some of the, the beautiful parts and pieces of the day and what the expectations are for tomorrow, what the expectations were for that day, and just checking in. So they create that, they build that together, and then they send that out to all of the families.
I think one of the important things about that is not overwhelming parents with lots of different communications. I appreciate that they can get their message across. They send in one email. The parents then are getting one to read as opposed to 4 or 5. The message is consistent. And I think that was, so the difference, those let's compare that to Angela, who's at the high school level, who's not really going through her parents as much, but really is trying to create a scenario where students can be successful. So her district, set 20-minute shifts per content on a day, and even has gone to content days. So they've shifted to make it easier on the parents to manage the amount of work the kids have to do. But they also, she has a mix of AP and non-AP classes. And for those AP students who are still going to take the AP exam coming up in a couple of weeks, they've got to do some longer extended writing pieces. They've got to be ready for that 45-minute open response set of questions. And so she's really kind of chunking things for her students as much as she can, but making sure that when they are going long, they're going long with a purpose and it's very clearly identified. I think that communication with the parents is something that I think is a really good thing. I know parent engagement is traditionally hard for schools. And I think that this is something that as a result of this, it will get better. Emily, I'd really like you to talk a little bit about Erin's communication with parents, and then Jen will talk about Janelle's communications, because Janelle has a unique setting because of her population. But Erin's in a charter school, and he has a little bit more intentional interaction with his parents than some teachers might.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely tell in conversation that it is like a pillar of the school. He several times referenced the essential triangles: teacher, student, and parent. And regular communication with parents is not something that is fresh and new because of this situation. Rather, it's one of those things that they had really tight beforehand. And so now they're just leaning on it a lot more. I go back to this advisory structure that they have. So they're kind of the point person for the kid, but they're also then that point person for the parent. And it sounds like someone kind of in Donnie's role, like a tech specialist role, has created these shared Google Sheets. You can always check in on a kid's grade in your grade book, in your digital grade book. You could tell a parent, well, they've got a C right now in math, or they've got a B in math. But they've created these shared Google Sheets that teachers are updating several times a week. That's more feedback, like they're struggling with this, they're not responding to me in this subject. So when he checks in with his parents, or when he's sending parents an email, or when he's having those daily meets with kids, he can pull that up and say, okay, yeah, you're turning in all of your language and lit work for me, but you seem to really be struggling with your your algebra work. Let's talk about that. So I think that triangle was strong in their school to begin with. They're leaning on it a lot now, and then they're creating some structures so that they can speak more broadly to how a kid is doing outside of their subject area. If I'm the PE teacher, this is really helping me talk about how they're doing in math or reading.
That's really nice, because as a mom of middle schoolers, which I know Ashley has one too, there are so many different teachers to stay in touch with, so many different email addresses. And now, Parker, which one is your science teacher? And keeping track of all that. So that would be nice to have that one point of contact, be somewhat knowledgeable about how he's doing in every
subject. Yeah, I think so too.
His focus was also on helping track where they are. Excuse me, not what are you missing, but what you've made progress on. And so from a parent's perspective, if it's always a negative message, then it makes it hard to keep them motivated to keep going on. But that progress, and track what is going well, and then you still need to keep working on this, I think is just a really important message to be sending to the kids, especially when it's going to be mediated by the parents.
Well, in conversations I've had with other teachers is that they would like to have kind of this advisory structure right now where every adult in the building gets a small group of kids to run point on. But that's, again, another something new to be exploring right now with all this new. Rather, in Erin's school, it's something they already had. And the communication is two-way. So, yes, he's able to share a lot with the parents about what's going on school-wise. but this is a relationship he's had all year. And if it's the families he's had before, it's relationships he's had multiple years. And so he gets a lot of information coming back to him. He's able to, really have his finger on the pulse of how these 11 families are doing, who might be struggling with, X or Y, and then connect them with other services if they need.
Thanks. So Jen, you want to talk about Jonelle?
So, Jonelle, she's got a very diverse population at her school. They have about, I think she said maybe 12 different languages, 14 maybe, that they service within her school, which is in Northern Kentucky. And even within her own classroom, she has, I think, about 4 different languages that she is trying to communicate to parents with. So I know they have on-site translators that are there to communicate with those parents who need that service. And so I know that Jonelle works closely with those through phone calls and helping them get access to their virtual platforms and to the websites that they use. But also I think she said, she mentioned having websites and communication on the websites translated in all of those, just for whenever parents come to access outside of a phone call. So was there something else that you wanted to add from that, Roland, that I'm not?
No, I just think, again, if we think back to the fact that communicating with parents is so critical during all this, and we've talked about it from everybody's settings, that extra layer of I'm communicating with parents who don't necessarily speak English as a primary language.
Right.
And I think that just adds an additional layer. Emily, somebody mentioned earlier about the idea of this is new, and we're building all these structures real quickly at the end of the school year. But luckily, it was at the end of the school year where there were a lot of processes already in place. And I think things that Jonelle talked about, they were able to. We have these structures already in our classrooms, and we can build off of these structures. And I know that's something that Angela spoke to. Her students really kind of already knew the processes that she was going to expect them to do. She didn't have to try to build them now, and she could lean on those during her instruction. So it may not be her giving lecture. She's being replaced by George Takei talking on a live stream on Facebook, or she's being replaced by a targeted YouTube video, but the students have a graphic organizer, and they know they're looking for context. They're comparing this to something they read about World War I, so they have that idea of comparison. So, but they have those processing skills already in place. I know Donnie talked to that as well. Being able to build off of those skills now and utilize that really made this easier, if you can't make it easier, than had this happened in, say, October, where those routines were not as in-depth, not as built as strongly.
He did add in reflecting that he taught the students how to use these tools that he's now transferred into NTI, but he wants to do a better job when we start school back of, in the beginning, really communicating with parents so that parents feel comfortable. If I'm asking your child to use Google Classroom to go to a Google meeting, then parents being able to also understand how to get their child there. So I thought that was really important. He also talked about making sure he has a working phone number for every parent, a working email address for every parent, and just checking in on that pretty regularly, because that's one of the things that he found was that a lot of the numbers he started with in his bank or emails were no longer valid because they really hadn't checked into those since the beginning. And so I thought that was really important. So yeah, he had some of those processes already in place, but really reflecting on how can I make these better.
I know Jonelle spoke to maybe even beginning at open house and showing parents some of these platforms and how they work and what they look like and how to get to them. Beyond just the meet and greet and here's our daily schedule, and this is the lunch calendar for the next month, but going that extra step and showing some of those virtual platforms. So and forbid anything like this happen again, but they might be more prepared in that aspect. But also, Roland, to your point about taking some of those classroom processes and having all of those already established and turning them into a virtual experience more easily. I know Johnelle talked about, just something simple as when you're doing a read aloud, as all teachers do in the elementary grades, and you have your kids on the carpet in front of you, stopping and asking questions, inviting kids to talk with each other and doing that turn and talk with their partners. And how does that look when you're in a virtual space and giving the kids that same opportunity? So I know she talked about if she's able to do a live video and doing a read aloud through that, pausing the video, giving the students a chance to capture some thinking and some reflection in that moment, and then giving them the opportunity to share that. So a modified version of the turn and talk that you might see in a classroom, and just bringing that read aloud to a more interactive place, so those kids reap those same benefits from it. But yeah, so I think that's one of those processes that you just have to be creative and think a little bit differently about how to do a lot of those things that you're already doing that's already wonderful. And there are just some, just a few modifications to make it a virtual reality.
Emily, do you want to talk about Aaron? Because Aaron took even a step further. He talked about the processes he had in his class and the gradual release process, but he also talked about how do I introduce some of this stuff now in the thing?
One moment, sorry. Sophie, I'm on a video, honey.
Oh, kids.
Duck.
Can you go ask Poppy, please?
But he's outside.
Go outside. You're wearing a dress. You can go outside.
No, but I don't have any.
Give me the shoe. Give me the shoe. Here's a shoe stuck in a legging. There we go. Please close the door. The stop and go sign we had on the store has been torn down. I won't say who did it. Back to your point. Sorry. Aaron was talking about gradual release, and what else?
But he was so Aaron was talking about this idea of using the structures he had in place, but he was even taking it a step further, saying, how do you introduce some new practices in this setting? I know there needs to be some direct instruction and process, so I can teach them how to do the process. But then how do I intentionally release that? So to Jen's point of this idea of how do you make it interactive and how do you give the students this process and give them ownership, he was already thinking about, if this continues, then I'm going to have to build these processes with my students next year, and really thinking about that process.
I think he kind of articulated that initially when things happened, it was sort of this knee-jerk, okay, the kids aren't going to be in front of me, let's get something together. And so he began with a novel study, and he was really thoughtful about the novel that he selected and the questions that he used. But, really, I think a lot of us, he was leaning on standards and essential skills he'd already taught to sort of send them off with. Practice in this new context. I curated the context for you. We'll be engaging in that way. But then he has realized that this is going to continue. And so there's going to be new content that has to be delivered. And he's really starting to wrap his head around, in the classroom, I ensure that kids are tackling an essential question. Inquiry is a big piece of being an IB school. Kids have lots of opportunity to process and to synthesize and to come back and collaborate with one another. He, was being silly and talked about going back to his roots of I do, we do, you do. But he was just beginning to formulate, like, learning happens the same in all spaces, the kind of thinking and processes your brain needs to go through. So how can he start creating those processes and experiences at a distance? And he's toying around with several ideas, including modeling on Screencastify and having kids set up their own Google Meets to collaborate with one another. But I think, someone mentioned earlier, I think Jen, God forbid this happen again. I think there are going to be some of these things that even if this never happens again, we won't go back to how it was. I think that Donnie and Jonelle will host that open house and get parents on board with certain processes or certain programs, even if this never happens again, because their instruction will shift. And I think Aaron's will too. I think there'll be a more blended model.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile for just a second to talk about his novel decision and how he really chose a novel he would not have chosen in class, and didn't choose a novel that he would have done in class because it was the content of that novel really needed a lot more, I won't say hand-holding, but a lot more interaction with the teacher to make sure they could process that effectively. But his thinking, so share a little bit about his thinking about the book that he did choose, and I don't remember the name of it, but I loved his thinking, that process of why he chose that book.
Yes, so he was moving his kids into preparing to do research around what life was like, particularly for groups that we historically have tended to less during the Great Depression. And the book that he typically would have chosen for his class, he just felt like the themes and the material covered in that book really required him as an adult to be there in the room with them and mediate. And since that wasn't going to be the case, he started looking for alternatives. And he ended up with a text called Esperanza Rising. And he went with it for a couple of reasons. This is for his 7th grade class. Esperanza Rising, the Lexile level is slightly below 7th grade, which was appealing to him because that allowed his kids who are slightly behind grade level to be able to access it confidently, but the themes are still really rich, so his higher level kids could really dig in and go deep. The majority of Aaron's kiddos are from Latinx households, and Esperanza Rising has a similar background, an immigrant background, so there was a lot of overlay between personal experience and personal schema that kiddos have and the characters in the book. And then kind of like Jonelle's population, because kids are managing multiple languages, there was this accompanying piece of the text on audio with some specific tools for English language learners, the ability to slow down the pace of the text, speed up the pace of the text, click on words and have them pronounced for you, click on words and see definitions. So yeah, I mean, his thoughtfulness around it, I feel like, was really layered. And, you know, an additional layer was him not being there. It's a great book. It's one of my personal favorites. But, and, you know, it's not something he typically would have used with his 7th graders, but it was a good fit kind of for all of those reasons.
I think that's a thing that all 4 of these teachers have that we want to celebrate, and that is that they were in really quick situations. I mean, in Kentucky, it basically came out on a Thursday, hey, Friday is the last day, or it came out on Wednesday afternoon, Thursday is your last day because we're out on Friday already and we're not going to be coming in. And so they had 24 hours to try to get a plan in place, and identify what number of their students had internet, which ones needed Chromebooks, all these kinds of things. And the thoughtfulness that all of these teachers, so as Angela started planning her first lessons, she didn't know what they had at home. Like if they had their notebooks with them, then they were fine. But if they didn't, they needed access to this content. So she pre-filled out some of the graphic organizers for the comparison between World War I and World War II that the students were going to have to do as part of their reading, not because she didn't think they could do it, but because she just didn't know what they had. And she was trying to be thoughtful of the student needs and still be able to have them do the comparison and look for the patterns and look for the synthesis. They still need to do the heavy loading and thinking, just she's giving them some of those details. And I think that's the craft of teaching that I appreciate that all 4 of these teachers brought to the table today during these conversations. So I think there's one more theme that I want to touch base on, and that is this idea of collaboration. Part of what we do a lot with our work inside of CTL is we spend a lot of time on Zoom and Google Meet, and collaborating with each other and trying to keep work going with schools and districts. But all of the teachers talked about the importance of collaborating with their peers and their colleagues. And what are some of the themes that you all, pieces that you all latched onto from those conversations?
Well, one of the things that I heard Donnie say was that before they just started making packets and sticking those in students' backpacks on that Friday, they took about a week to come together as a school, as teachers, and to really think about what is our approach to this going to be. So the one thing that they knew they had done was sent every student home with a device, because that is not their current policy. Students do not take home devices. So they did that. So every student went home with the device. Then they started making phone calls to families. We've sent you home with a device. Do you have Wi-Fi? Do you need us to help you contact Spectrum and get Wi-Fi at your home? Here are your child's passwords, to all of these different parts and pieces. So they spent some time doing kind of the logistics piece, and then they all planned together, right? And then they started rolling out lessons after having what he said was a really strong week of just thoughtfulness and reflection and making sure. He said, we have one chance at this, right? We've got to, hook them. We want them to buy into this. We want them to, this is a novel approach to teaching and learning, and we're excited to do school this way with you over the next few weeks. So I heard him say he was thankful that his team had slowed down to do that, and then they continued to do that and check in with each other and rethink and redesign and go in different directions sometimes after those conversations.
One of the things Jonelle spoke to was how her team, I think there's 6 teachers on her team, and how they decided from the very beginning to meet every morning, I think at 10 a.m. as a team, to have just a grade level meeting, touch base, plan, figure out next steps. But she said through that, they also realized that each one of them could divide and conquer. And when they made that grade level wide Google Classroom, that they could each take pieces and parts of that to help their students navigate all of their content and all of the learning and everything on there. But they would each have different areas of expertise. One was really good at doing tutorial videos on how to change your Wi-Fi network, or one was really good about how to access YouTube videos or this other virtual platform. And so they each found a space that they could contribute something differently and just really work as a team on making all of it more manageable. And when she said that, I thought, I can't imagine having to do this on my own, because there are so many pieces and parts, logistics and content-wise and everything in between, that I think it would be difficult to do alone. So I think having that team to collaborate with every day, and each other's struggles and celebrate successes together as well, I think that's really important, because teachers are not used to working alone. Teachers are used to having their colleagues that they can lean on. So I think it's a critical piece of this distance learning for teachers. For sure.
Roland, I'll let you go.
I think it's interesting. I know that Angela talked about administration having weekly meetings with staff to keep things moving, and just recognizing that everything is changing quickly, but keeping that communication lines open. And I think the communication lines being open and expectations being clear from the administration helped. She is, so the difference between a team of elementary teachers working together, she is the U.S. history teacher at Bullis. Mm-hmm. She is, to a certain extent, a little bit on an island, but she made sure that she met with her department. She is the department chair there, so she kept meeting with her department virtually to make sure that they were thinking about the different ways they could approach things. What are some lessons learned? What are some things that were being successful? So I think that was an important part of it. I know that it's been, an up and down journey for Angela and a lot of teachers. And this is not what we signed up for as teachers, necessarily to be sitting in front of a computer, but really to be working with our kids. And so I think this part of it is critical. One, to learn the new things we need to be successful. But two, we're human. And how do we work socially with people when you have to sit in your little gray office all the time?
I think it's interesting. So Aaron is in middle school, which is more like a high school scenario where they are departmentalized, but they do meet weekly as a team. And I think that has allowed them the space, not as a content team, but as a middle school team. And that's allowed them to have the conversations kind of similar to what Jonelle's team was talking about in making sure that things are similar across all the second grade classrooms. It's given them a chance to have a conversation about the load that each teacher is putting on kids and families to make sure that, if there's a massive research project happening in the social studies room this week, maybe there isn't one happening in the literacy room this week. Or if math really has something amazing going on a Zoom with some special guests on Thursday, that the science teacher isn't also trying to get kids, focused elsewhere. I think that that's a conversation we have with teachers a lot at the middle and high school level, trying to get folks to see outside of their four walls, their classroom, and think about a kid's entire experience. And I'm hopeful that more of us are thinking in that way now, and that kind of thinking will come back with us when we go back to school. I think it can be hard. There's so many meetings all the time in a teacher's week, and what I tend to see is that department meetings, content-specific meetings, seem to take precedence because we are going deeper with the standards and instructional practice, and I understand that. But I think that a lot of richness can come for kiddos when all of the teachers who sort of see me and interact with me are aligned. And then I think something that is heavy on my mind as a former administrator, and Aaron spoke to this a little bit, was your point, Roland, that teaching is a very social interaction, and we rely on each other for a lot more than help me understand the standard or how should I assess X. Like that coffee that I have at the copy machine with you every morning is a lifeline to a lot more than the standards. And I think teachers are missing it. And in his school in particular, I don't think the title is Dean of Culture, but there's someone with like this title of being in charge of school culture. They're hosting weekly virtual teacher happy hours. He was very pumped that one was luau themed and he got to wear a Hawaiian shirt. But I am hopeful that as we kind of settle into this new territory, that we hear more about that. I'm not hearing a lot of this. And, I'm very busy, clearly, at home with children. But not everybody is. And I have to imagine that if I'm missing my colleagues, were I home alone, I would certainly be missing my colleagues a whole lot more. I think as school leaders, we have to kind of put our mind to how am I maintaining not just collaboration, but community amongst my teachers. And I was happy to hear that his schools kind of already got their head in that space.
Well, thank you all for your thoughts and insights. When we first started this idea of doing these teacher interviews, we wanted to make sure that we got a few out because we knew things were changing and we knew teachers didn't really hadn't planned for this. This wasn't something they saw coming down the pike. It happened really quickly. So we wanted to get some quick posts out, but I thought it was good for us to take this entry and do a little reflection on what we've learned and what some of the things that we see that these teachers are doing. This will post on Thursday, the 23rd of April. Just in the last 24 hours, a lot of districts in the state of Kentucky have begun to identify their end of school date. And that is now give or take a few days. A lot of the schools in Kentucky are going to be out mid-May, about around the 15th of May. One of the longer ends is going to be Jefferson County JCPS schools, which will be out May 27th. They had a 2-week no NTI period when they first canceled. They just canceled school and went through spring break, and then after that, so they're going a little bit longer. And there are a couple, I believe, Dawson Springs Independent is looking at May 1st as their last day of school for students. We know that this still means there's several weeks of instruction and there's time to refine patterns. And so we're going to continue this interview series. I'm not sure who's up first on the next round for Tuesday. Do we remember?
Hopefully, I will be interviewing a bilingual kindergarten teacher. Her name is Erin Keene, and she teaches at Chicago Public Schools.
I'll be interviewing a middle school science teacher, and so I'm excited about that to hear what she's doing with her students and how she's engaging her students in that scientific inquiry process.
And I'll have a dynamic duo. I'm going to do a third grade team. I'm going to interview a third grade team from Eastern Kentucky that's doing a lot with their students. So I'm excited about that. That'll be next week.
And I will have an 11th, 12th grade online gaming teacher from Georgia Public Schools.
I know right now my kids would love to have that job when they get older.
So no electrical engineer, gaming school, gaming.
If he hears that that's even a job possibility, the electrical engineer is out of the question. Yeah.
Well, so we will keep the series moving forward, and we will transition away from classroom teachers as we begin thinking about next year, and we'll have some conversations with administrators and counselors. And then as we get closer to the school year, we'll adjust to help think about setting up those classrooms for either virtual or real classrooms for students as they come back to school in the fall. So thank you all, and I will see you all later. Again, this is the 5th installment of Crushing COVID in the Classroom podcast from the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning.